My name is Honora Palmer, and at 36 years old I learned that the cheapest word in my father's mouth was the word pathetic. I had just made Major in the United States Army after 13 years of early mornings, hard postings, night classes, and the kind of work that most people never see and rarely understand. When I invited my family to the small pinning ceremony, my father did not even pretend to consider coming. My mother smoothed it over the way she always did, with soft words and a change of subject. My brother never called at all, so I pinned the gold oak leaf on my collar with the help of people who shared none of my blood, and I told myself that was perfectly fine because I had spent a lifetime telling myself that. The ceremony was held in a conference room with bad carpet and good intentions. My battalion commander said a few words about steadiness under pressure. A handful of soldiers I genuinely trusted stood along the back wall. Tradition says someone who loves you pins the rank on your collar. I had saved 2 chairs in the front row, the way a person saves seats out of habit more than actual hope. They stayed empty through the entire thing. My sergeant, a quiet man named Ruiz, finally stepped forward and did the honours so the moment would not pass with nobody filling it. I thanked him and meant every word. Afterward there was sheet cake and weak coffee, and people clapped me on the shoulder and asked about the new posting, and I smiled and answered every question. The whole time I kept my phone face up on the table near the napkins. No message came. Not from my mother, not from my father, not from my brother who had a phone surgically attached to his hand from the moment he woke up. I am not going to tell you it did not sting, because steadiness is not the same thing as numbness, and I have never once pretended otherwise. A week before the ceremony, I had called the family house to invite them. My mother answered, which meant my father was somewhere within earshot. I kept it simple, the date, the time, the address, the offer to reserve nearby lodging. There was a pause, the kind of pause that means someone is covering the receiver and having a low conversation that you are not supposed to hear. Then my father came on the line. Not warm, never warm with me. We're not wasting our time on your pathetic little promotion ceremony, he said. I have replayed that sentence more times than I will ever admit out loud. He did not call it small. He specifically called it pathetic. My father had spent 22 years as an enlisted soldier and retired as a first sergeant, and somewhere in those years he had decided that officers were people who signed papers while other men did the actual bleeding. When his daughter became one of them, and worse, an acquisition officer who lived in contracts and oversight work, he heard it as a kind of personal defection. Paper pushing, he liked to say at every family gathering. Not real soldiering. I did not argue with him. Arguing with my father was like arguing with a closed garage door. You could pound on it all day, and the only thing that ever moved was you. So I said the word soldiers use when there is simply nothing left to say. Understood. And I hung up before my voice could do anything I would later regret. I sat in my kitchen for a long while after that. Then I made a list of the people who would actually show up. The list was short, and short was honest, and I had learned over many years to prefer honest over comfortable. My mother, Lorraine Palmer, was not a cruel woman. She was a peacekeeper, and peacekeepers learn early that the cheapest way to keep a difficult man calm is to give him less to feel threatened by. When I brought home a good report card as a child, she would set it on the counter and say quietly, "Don't wave it around." When I got into college on a full scholarship, she told the relatives it was a little program she had heard of. She was never trying to wound me. She was lowering my temperature so that my father would not boil. I figured that out as an adult, sitting in a counsellor's office on a base far from home. And understanding it did not make it hurt any less. It only made it sadder. My brother Dylan was 3 years younger than me and was, in my father's private accounting system, the family's real investment. Dylan worked as a liaison for a subcontractor connected to defence work, the kind of job where the title is vague and the parking lot is always full of trucks that cost more than the building. My father loved to talk about Dylan's deals at every family gathering, even though he did not truly understand them, and did not need to. The numbers were large and the trucks were new, and that was a language he deeply respected. I had started noticing things over the years the way you notice a draft before you ever find the open window. Dylan's house had gotten bigger. His vacations had gotten longer. The watch on his wrist at Thanksgiving was the kind I had once priced by accident in an airport and put down very quickly. A liaison salary is a good salary. It is not that salary. I never said anything, because it was not my business, and because Dylan had a way of turning questions into accusations, and accusations into a reason to call me jealous. So I filed it away quietly and without comment, the way I filed most things that concerned my family. That autumn, my career took a turn I had not chased and had not expected. I was reassigned to a small oversight cell whose work touched the integrity of defence procurement. In plain words, my job became helping make sure the government's contracting process stayed completely honest, that bids were real, that estimates were not quietly inflated, and that the people awarding contracts were not subtly steering them toward friends. It is unglamorous work. It is also the kind of work that, done correctly, saves more taxpayer money than any single soldier will ever cost the country. I did not announce the new posting to my family. My father would have found a way to call oversight work paper pushing with a clipboard, and I was not in the mood to hand him the opening. Then something happened that changed the entire situation. The regional newspaper ran a feature on local service members, and there in the middle of the spread was a photograph from a Pentagon event I had attended for work. I was in dress uniform, mid-stride, and on either side of me walked two men in dark suits who were actually part of the venue's standard security detail for the day. The caption, written by someone in a considerable hurry, described them as my bodyguards. It was not even close to true, but it did not need to be true to do its work. In a small town, a photograph like that travels faster than any correction. By breakfast the next morning, half the county had seen the daughter who supposedly pushed papers standing at the Pentagon looking, to their untrained eyes, important and powerful and connected to people who made real decisions. My family saw it too, and what they saw was not their daughter or their sister. They saw leverage. They saw a woman who had suddenly become worth calling. My phone buzzed at 6 a.m. with my mother's name on the screen, a time she reserved strictly for emergencies and genuinely bad news. People who skip your ceremony do not call at dawn to celebrate you. They call at dawn because something of theirs is on fire, and they have just remembered that you own a hose. I answered and made my voice flat and ready. "Mom, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," she said in the bright voice she uses when something is very wrong. "We just think it's time the family got together. It's been too long." I did not let it go. "Mum, I love you, but you don't call me at 6 a.m. for a family reunion. Tell me what's going on with Dylan." The silence that came back was the loudest thing she had said all morning. "We need to talk," she finally said, the brightness completely gone now. "All of us as a family. Come out Saturday. Your father wants you there. Your father wants you there." In 36 years, I was not certain he had ever once wanted me anywhere. That single sentence told me how serious this was. The campaign to soften me up started before I had even finished my first cup of coffee that morning. My father texted me, which he did roughly never. "Morning, sweetheart," it said. I read it 3 times to make sure my eyes were working correctly. My father called me by my name when he was pleased, and by nothing at all when he was not. Sweetheart was a word he saved for waitresses and women he wanted something from. Then my sister-in-law Brooke sent a photo of my nephew, 6 years old and gap-toothed, holding a drawing he had made, with a caption saying he had been asking when Aunt Nora was coming. Months of silence, and now suddenly my morning was full of warmth from people who had skipped the most important day of my professional life. Real love does not arrive on a schedule that lines up this neatly with someone else's need. The answer to what they needed found me at work before my family even handed it over, and it found me in the worst possible way. I was not investigating anything connected to my brother. I want to be absolutely clear about that because it matters. But oversight work means that names cross your desk regularly, company names, contract numbers, the ordinary paperwork of who is buying what from whom. One afternoon, a name went by that I recognised. It was the prime contractor that sat directly above the subcontractor where Dylan worked. And Dylan's small firm did almost all of its business with that one company, a dependency he had actually bragged about at more than one holiday dinner. The file was not mine to open. It carried markings that told me clearly it belonged to an active matter worked by people with very specific legal authority. I did the only correct thing available to me. I did not open it. I did not read past what was already visible on the outside. I noted the date and the fact of what I had seen, closed the folder, and felt the floor tilt a few degrees beneath my chair. I thought about the bigger house, the longer vacations, the watch I had priced once and put down fast. I thought about my mother's dawn phone call and my father's sudden sweetheart, and the gap-toothed photo of my nephew deployed like a chess piece. The cold feeling in my chest that had been spreading since Tuesday settled into something colder and more certain. So I did the thing the rules had carved into me from my very first week in that cell. I called a lawyer before I called my family back. A JAG officer named Captain Holloway, who handled exactly these kinds of complicated knots. I kept it general, because I had no specifics and did not want them improperly. If a service member in an oversight role learns a close relative might be connected to a matter in her lane, what is her obligation? Holloway did not hesitate for even a second. The moment you have a personal connection to a matter, you recuse. You step back from anything touching it. You disclose it in writing up your chain, and if anyone, family included, asks you to use your position to influence it, that gets disclosed too. Then she said the line I needed to hear most clearly. There is no version of helping that actually helps. That night I took out the one piece of my family I had always kept closest, and it did not come from the people who raised me. It came from my grandfather, my mother's father, a quiet man who had fought in Korea, came home, farmed for the rest of his life, and never raised his voice in my hearing even once. He was the only relative who ever took my service seriously from the very beginning. The day I was commissioned, he handed me a folded letter and told me not to read it until I genuinely needed it. I had read it exactly twice in all the years since. I read it a third time that night at my kitchen table under the one lamp that worked. His handwriting was small and deliberate, a farmer's careful hand. Most of it was plain, the kind of plain that takes a whole lifetime to earn. But there was one line I had underlined myself years earlier, so I would never have to search for it when the moment came. Rank can be pinned on and taken off. Integrity is the only thing they can't reassign. And under it, almost as an afterthought, a sentence I had not fully understood at 23, and understood completely now. Family doesn't ask you to lie. People who love you never make your honesty the price of belonging. I sat with that for a very long time. My grandfather had known my father for 40 years. He had watched a difficult man raise his grandchildren, and he had chosen those specific words for a moment exactly like this one, a moment he must have seen coming long before I did. I folded the letter back along its soft, worn creases and slid it into the inside pocket of my jacket, where it would stay until Saturday. I would need to remember whose granddaughter I was. The other half of my family was about to test it. Saturday came grey and early. I drove the 2 hours to my parents' house in civilian clothes, jeans and a plain coat, because that was a deliberate decision and not an accident. I could have worn my uniform with the new oak leaf. I could have walked into that house wearing the rank they suddenly found so impressive. I did not, because I was not going there to win an argument about whose service counted. I was going as the daughter, on level ground, which was the one place my father had never once been willing to meet me. On the passenger seat beside me lay a plain manila folder holding copies of the disclosure and recusal I had already filed, paperwork proving I had stepped fully out of Dylan's reach and my family's reach in the same careful motion, days before this meeting. When I arrived, they were all arranged like a welcome and waiting like a verdict. My father at the head of the table, expansive and almost jovial, a man who genuinely believed he had already won. My mother hovering with the coffee pot. Dylan in a clean shirt, looking noticeably better than the week before, lifted up by the belief that his big sister was about to make his problem quietly disappear. Brooke beside him with my nephew on her lap, dressed up in his good clothes the way you dress a child when you want the adults around you to remember he is watching. My father started before I had even fully sat down. "There she is," he said, warmer than I had heard him in years. "The fixer." Then Dylan finally said it, the way a confession comes out when someone is more sorry about the consequences than the actual act. There was a federal investigation. It touched the contracting work his company had done, the bids, the cost estimates, the awards. He used words like technicality and everybody does it, and the government just doesn't understand how the business really works. When he ran out of euphemisms, my father took over, because my father did not deal in euphemisms. "You're at the Pentagon now," he said. "You're in that exact world. You know, people make a call. Slow it down. Get them to look the other way. You can fix this for your brother." And there it was. The whole reason for the dawn phone call and the sudden sweetheart text, and my nephew's drawing and my mother's casserole. They did not want me at their table. They wanted the woman in the photograph, the one they believed had power, and they wanted her to spend every bit of it on the son they had actually chosen. Before I answered them, I made completely sure they understood exactly what they had just placed on the table, because I did not want anyone claiming afterward that they had not known what they were asking. "I want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly," I said, in the even voice I use when the stakes are at their very highest. "You're asking me to use my official position to interfere with a federal investigation, to make a call, lean on someone and get a case slowed down or quietly steered. Is that right?" My father's jaw tightened. He did not like hearing his request stated in plain English. "I'm asking you to help your family," he said. "Same thing, different words," I said back. "What you're describing is obstruction. It's a federal crime. Not for Dylan, for me." The room went completely quiet. Dylan finally looked directly at me, and what I saw in his face was not remorse. It was calculation. The look of a man carefully weighing whether his sister's conscience could be argued away if he pushed in exactly the right places. "Come on," he said, using the old childhood nickname like a tool he thought still worked. "Nobody's going to know." "You'd be doing one phone call. I would know," I said. "And so would the people whose entire job is to catch exactly this." Then I opened the manila folder and slid it to the centre of the table. I told them plainly what was already inside it. The day after leaving their house the previous week, I had done what the law required me to do. I had disclosed that a relative of mine might be connected to a matter near my official work. I had formally recused myself from anything that could possibly touch Dylan's case, and I had reported that members of my own family had asked me to interfere with a federal investigation. I had written down what was said in this house, the date and the exact words, and I had signed it. The fixer they had invited to that dinner did not exist and never had. Every door was already closed. Days ago, through the proper channels, before I ever made this drive. The room came apart and I stayed in one piece, and that was the entire story of my life compressed into about 90 seconds. My father stood so fast his chair scraped back and hit the wall. He called me a traitor. He called me cold. He said I'd always thought I was better than them, and that after everything they had done for me, this was how I paid it back. Dylan went pale and then loud. "You ruined me," he said. "You understand that? You just handed them everything." My mother put her hands over her mouth and said my name like a wound. And Brooke held my nephew tight and aimed him directly at me like the last card she had left to play. "Is this what you want? You want him to grow up without a father? You could stop this and you're choosing not to." "Look at him." I looked at him. He was frightened by the noise and did not understand a single thing happening in that room. And he deserved better than to be used this way by every adult who claimed to love him most. I looked at him, and then I looked at Brooke, and I kept my voice as steady as a hand on a rail. "Family doesn't ask you to break the law to save them," I said. "That's not love. That's a setup.